Hey everyone, Tony D with another Screenwriter's Take. This time we're going to talk about Jojo Rabbit, but I'm going to give you spoilers. There's tons of spoilers in this. It will ruin the movie if you haven't seen it. So go to my non-spoiler review, unless you're a screenwriter and you're looking for analysis or whatever. Because we're going to delve into the 3 acts, and we can't do that without talking about what actually happened in the movie. So be aware, you've been warned. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. And please check out my books, Wokistan and the Pineys, both free on Kindle for Kindle Unlimited users. Now, Jojo Rabbit. The first act is, of course, about Jojo, how he gets his nickname. He's in the Hitler Youth there. It introduces all the characters. His friend, who is very funny. Sam Rockwell is just amazing. Rebel Wilson and Theon from Game of Thrones. They're also at the Hitler Youth thing, helping out. So, and of course, Scarlett Johansson is his mom, and she does a great turn, very charming. She's always the fun mom and keeping his spirits up. And she really, you can tell she's under a lot of constraints trying to deal with her husband being away. So we get all this great dynamics between the various characters, and the first act basically ends when Jojo discovers the Jewish girl living in the secret compartment in their house. So at first, their relationship, and we get into Act 2, their relationship is very contentious. She calls him a little Nazi, and he is, but he's only 10. He doesn't really know any better. He has learned all these horrible things about Jewish people. He doesn't know what he's talking about, of course, because the Nazis have filled his head with all sorts of nonsense. So they end up in a stalemate in which he can't report her or tell his mom, but she can't really do much to him unless, she turns him in, and she basically threatens him. And so they have this weird stalemate, and then he decides, well, I'll write a book about Jewish people, and at least, I'll be doing some good, he imagines. So then we follow their development as he, begins to discover that she's really just a person. And, she plays with him at first, and they have this scene about her boyfriend, Nathan, and he pretends to write letters from Nathan, which finally strike a chord with her. She's very strong up until that point, and that's the moment where she breaks down. And then later, of course, by the third act, we find out why, because Nathan is dead, and he's pretending to be Nathan, and she knows that, but it makes her very sad. So, the movie starts to become more serious but midway through the second act, even though Hitler, the imaginary Hitler, keeps showing up, and it's funny in his weird, dark way. It's the director, by the way, in a genius turn. So, by the end of the second act, we have the problem, which is for Jojo, he has become enamored. He's in love, basically, with the Jewish girl, and he wants to protect her. But he also is still, involved in the Nazis. He's still trapped in Germany, basically. And so the war comes, and he's still kind of doing stuff for the war, not as much as his friend who gets drafted. But by the third act, we have the big revelation, which is the war's coming, and then the big low point for the characters when Scarlett Johansson is captured and killed as a traitor. So we come to understand why the Gestapo searched his house right thereafter. They search his house. We see them search the house first, and then later is the shocking moment when he discovers his mother hanging from the gallows, which I thought was wonderfully shot, and the moment is just amazing. And then the moment right after that's great too, because Jojo just sits there staring up at her, and you get that sense of like, wow, what is he thinking? I mean, first he's very upset, of course, but then it's like, he's processing. Because what is he going to do at that point, right? So, the movie gets very dark at this point, but there's still hope. There's still kind of funny stuff in it. Sam Rockwell redesigning his uniform and fighting the last battle of, I guess, I don't think it was Berlin, but someplace in Germany when the Russians come or the Americans come. And so you have all that. So there's still comedic elements, but they're sort of over the top satirical comedic elements. And it's really a satire about war and how pointless and futile it is, and things are blowing up left and right. And it's really great the way they do that, I think. And finally, you have the climax of the movie. And for me, the climax of this movie is the moment where Jojo goes back to the house and either has to tell the Jewish girl she's free to go, or he's going to lie to her and try to keep her in the house. And of course, he tries to lie to her and keep her in the house, but then realizes he can't do that and lets her out. So that moment is great because it says so much about Jojo. He has nothing now, and he's in love with this girl, and he can't let her go. And then finally, at the end, he lets her out, and they dance, and you hope they have a happy ending at that point. So it's just a pretty good movie. I mean, I think if the director could have gone a little darker even with the imaginary Hitler. He seems to sort of just fade out mostly until his moment in the third act where he basically just tells him to F off. I don't know if the 10-year-old would have done it seemed like too big of a turnaround. I would have liked to seen something more gradual. Maybe like, the imaginary Hitler like behind him as he's talking to people, like, and they did that a little, but I can understand why the director would be very wary of doing that. Doing that too much would have worn out the welcome, the novelty of it. I mean, I think the climax of the funny part of that was when Hitler's eating a giant unicorn head, which was just weird and didn't make much sense, but was kind of funny. So overall, I think you could see the very classic 3-act structure here, and you could see that they hung the entire movie on the relationship between Jojo and the Jewish girl, and that works because it's a very human relationship. It takes us through this incredibly dark time, and we can forgive Jojo for his faults because he is a 10-year-old kid who doesn't really fully understand the world. He's just sort of exploring it and getting it wrapped around his head. But through him, we get through this, and there are these touching moments. I mean, certainly between him and his mother. Sam Rockwell has that last moment at the end, which is great. It's just, and even before that, when he helps the Jewish girl, it's really a good movie. I enjoyed it immensely. I think people should see it. I think it should be supported. It's a different kind of movie. It's a satire, and yet it takes place at this time, but it's not like a preachy. I mean, look, World War II is a terrible time, and there's certainly things to say about it, but I like that this movie is somewhat detached from it a little bit because they can portray things, and this was true towards the end. Hitler just ordered everybody to fight to the death, basically. So they did have children, very young children firing guns, and the Hitler Youth were conscripted, and they were given weapons and, told to fight it all out, and they did. So they didn't all fight to the death, but, So, I mean, that kind of truth sometimes is missing from the bigger movies about World War II because they don't, they're too busy creating a melodramatic scene between the adult characters. They don't want to throw in all this other stuff because it's very complicated. And yet, this movie kind of covered that complication in its own weird way, possibly more accurate because war in and of itself is very absurd. I mean, it's just absolute chaos. So bizarre things happen. Terrible things happen. I mean, there were bodies littering the streets by the end of this movie, and it's pretty bloody and gruesome. And I've seen, World War II movies where they don't even do that. Like they're too busy, filming the actors in wonderful light or whatever. So I think this was a solid entry, and you should definitely go see it. It's called Jojo Rabbit, and directed by, I can't pronounce his name. I'm not going to butcher it, but he's the same director as Thor Ragnarok, and he's directed a bunch of other movies. Very talented guy. So that's a Screenwriter's Take. We will see you next time.